Hi, this is Heather Vox from the Million Person Project. Welcome to the Stories Are Power interview series. I'm excited to be here today with Firuzeh Mahmoudi, who's the founder and director of United for Iran. So thank you so much for joining this conversation, and I'd love for you to just introduce yourself and United for Iran to the viewers.
Thank you. I'm Firuzeh Mahmoudi, and I am an Iranian American who lives in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. I used to be an environmental activist. Now I do human rights and civil liberties work, and it's all part of the same struggle. And United for Iran, I founded in 2009, quickly after the uprising, accidentally in fact, after the uprising in 2009. We work to improve civil liberties in Iran. We do it in three ways: improving human rights, citizen engagement through technology, and building capacity of civil society.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm really curious about is the role that stories play in United for Iran and your work.
One role that stories play is talking about our work. It makes it much easier for the audience or allies to engage with one story as opposed to a statistic, right? There's this saying, I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but the idea behind this saying is one person is a story, is a tragedy. A million individuals having something happen to them is a statistic. So by sharing a story, people can make a personal connection with, be it with someone who's on death row, who's in prison, or is on the streets and being harassed.
Yeah, so those are the kinds of statistics that you want people to understand in the world, but you want them to understand it through the individual stories of the people that are experiencing it.
Right, to fully experience what it's like to be in that position, right?
Right.
And then you're like, not only this one person, this is actually happening to everybody.
Wow.
Right?
So what is one specific story that has helped you guys do that in your campaigns?
One story could be around executions in Iran. There are more executions per capita in Iran than any other country, unfortunately. And we rank in total numbers only number 2 to China.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it's really a grave situation. And that's a very heavy piece of information. And if you have a story of one individual who, let's say, is imprisoned, whose brother has been already executed, he's on death row with, who's Kurdish, who's very young, maybe late 20s or early 30s, and there's 30 or 40 of them who were put on death sentence together for a crime that half of them were accused of that happened after they were actually imprisoned, who were changed their religion to become Sunni, so that was part of the complications, and don't have the resources to really fight for this. And the other brother and the mom trying to save their lives, save the son's life. And that story, when we shared it, we had a lot of traction on that story and got a lot of people to act.
Yeah, so it's the ability to really connect to one person and their story.
Absolutely. People are much more able and take action much more often if it's one individual or one story.
Yeah, wow. And so working with stories like that, that are so heavy and urgent, what role does you telling your own story versus you telling other people's stories, how do you balance that?
Balance is the right word. It's a balancing act for sure, for multiple reasons. One is, we have this saying in Farsi that I'm going to butcher yet again. That's going to be the theme of our talk. If a branch that has the heaviest fruit is closest to the ground. So if you do really the biggest work, you tend to be more humble. So that's definitely culturally very Iranian to not brag, if you will, about who you are, and especially the leaders of the movement tend to be that way. So I definitely want to hold that and honor that. I also want to honor that there's so many people in Iran putting their lives and years on the line, and so much more their education as they get banned from education for their activism. Let's say that my role as an ally in support of them is secondary often. Like, I, have a free life more or less and can do what I want and say what I want. I'm not going to be in prison for this storytelling session. So I'm second to that. And so I hold those two, and I also hold the fact that to be a good leader, to be able to have our collective voice out there, have our mission out there in the world, to be able to bring in more folks, be it allies, more talent, more funds, more media. I need to have a strong voice and express myself and have an authentic voice, which is about my story and not somebody else's story. So I do that, and I'm doing it more recently, and I try to do it as honestly and authentically as I can, and so far it's worked out.
Yeah, I think that is something that so many of our viewers are going through is, what role does my story play? What does it mean to get up on stage and to tell my story when there's all these other stories that I could be telling too? Who am I to tell my own story?
Right.
And at the Million Person Project, what we believe is it's such an act of generosity to allow the people to know who you are and to know what it is that's deeply driving you to do the work. But that is, complicated in different cultures and different practices. And so it's interesting to hear you talk about that balance between being humble and acknowledging all the people who have been working for years and also stepping into your own authenticity.
Right. And if there's any negative reactions, usually from people that are further away that don't know you, that's online. Like people who actually know me, even if they're recently from Iran and see me speak or interact with me, people can tell, intentions and if someone's genuine. So I definitely have not experienced directly anything that was anything but supportive. And also I firmly believe that we're all our leaders. It's not that I'm a leader, so you're not a leader. We all can shine and should shine and do what we can to excel at our purpose, right? So by modeling it, I'm hopefully encouraging others to do that. And by having more power, if you will, I have the ability to support others even more in doing that. Let's say if I have more resources financially or more media, then I can help others to have that access as well. Since I started doing my public speaking, I had done some presentation with PowerPoints before, but telling my story and really kind of learning what is my story, what do I want to share, what seems authentic, and really working on sharing that. I've already seen others who were inspired both by the idea of it and seeing its others' reaction to it, as well as by the standard. Like if you practice for a story that you want to tell, be it yours or a presentation, 2 hours versus over a month, it's a very different thing that you're sharing, right?
Yeah.
So like you see the light bulb, like, oh wow, that I can do that, but I see it now.
Wow, so when you were getting ready to tell your story, how much time were you spending preparing for that? What was your process?
I've really done it once in the way that I would call it storytelling. Process was first be clear on what the story was, and I tried to do a little bit in a vacuum, and that didn't work. But as soon as I had a situation to an audience, it kind of came together very quickly. So that was interesting. And then it took a little bit to get the story, kind of the narrative down. And then there was a lot of tweaking over weeks. Maybe the whole process was 4 weeks, but first week was to get it down, and then multiple weeks to kind of hone in and practice the delivery so that it was polished yet authentic. That was the hardest part for me, to share the story and have it somewhat memorized, at the same time have it not be that I'm just saying these words, just I'm accessing the words, but not the feelings and the experience.
Yeah. So what supported you in being authentic up there and accessing the feelings and the experiences?
Your advice was great. Thank you for your many advices. One advice that you gave that I thought was spot on was if you're sharing a story about a certain point in your life, be there. You know, so a lot of it goes back to like, I'm like, man, I should have taken drama when I was in high school.
Yeah.
So it's like really embodying that. So,
Yeah.
you know, so that comes across. So that was one thing. Being prepared really helps. If you get to a point, somewhere I read this, it it has some truth to it. I don't know if it's universal, but for me it was interesting. If you know the Happy Birthday song, you can do 20 things and light the candles, walk around the room,
Right.
and still think it and do it in a tone that you want, right? So if you know what you want to talk about innately to that level, then you can focus on your delivery and being authentic. And thirdly, connection with the audience. Like be with one at a time, even though it's a big room. And when you're with them, be with them. And they like that was the most surprising part was how friendly the audience was and how much they wanted me to succeed. It was actually really fun being there and being in front of them and sharing. So having that experience and envisioning who else is in that room that maybe it's not there right then that wants you to succeed or you can speak with, those kind of help me just be me.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things about that, as you're telling a story, accessing the memory and getting in touch with it and being connected to the audience, all of that requires like a certain level of presence that can be difficult when you're sharing a difficult story. So what has been your process with that?
I think generally speaking, and I could be wrong, but I think for me that part's not super hard. You know, like sharing I'm an extrovert. I'll make friends with someone on board in a minute. You know, so sharing myself comes very naturally.
Yeah, and what was the part of your story when you shared your story that you were hesitating to share or deciding whether or not to share? How have you decided which pieces of your story to share?
Well, I had a specific information to share, so I was looking for relevant stories to that, right? So I was sharing the launch of our latest project. It's called Iran Incubator. Well, basically, we are incubating dozen or so groups to build apps for good to be used inside Iran. So reverse engineering from that, I use an example of one app that's done really well in Iran and saying, hey, do you see how awesome this app is? And see how much traction it's had and how much people want it and need it? It's the first one. We're going to make a dozen more. Isn't that awesome? So to share that story, I shared my story that was relevant to that app. So that's kind of how I came up with the beginning and the ending story to some extent.
And what was the story that you shared in relationship to the app? And why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about that app?
Sure. So the app was released by a group of Iranian activists, and it's called Gershad. Gershad's contraction for the words Gashte Ershad, or the moral police in Iran. And some of you might know Waze or other navigation apps, and they tend to have, Waze does for sure, a police button that you can press to detour the police. So Gershad's similar to that, but it detours the moral police. So my story was that when I was 16, my mom, my sister, and I visited my aunt in the city of Kerman in southern Iran. And one hot afternoon, we were out. We were kind of listless. We were like, let's go out. We probably had too big of a lunch. That's what they do in Kerman, eat a lot. So it's a country pastime, eating. So we went in the streets, and we were just shopping around. And I noticed my headscarf was on backwards. I quickly lifted it and turned it around, and we continued. And Iranians love to sew their own clothing, and there are like fabric stores everywhere, right up there with rug stores and food stores, and gold, and a lot of gold. So we walked into the fabric store, and right as we walked in, the door opened up again, and there were two men in uniform with like really mean eyes, like looking just at me. And like, my heart dropped. I could tell they were there to arrest me, and I'm 16 and felt in trouble, you know, and so they came over and they arrested me on the spot, and my mom refused to let me be taken alone. So they took all of us pretty cordially to the van, got us in. And I was nervous, and I have this nervous tic where I giggle when I get nervous. So I was in the van, and I was giggling, and my aunt, was biting her lip to make me stop, and that was making me laugh more. And they're like, "Ma'am, stop laughing." I'm like, "Okay." So they took us in, and they held us for 5 hours. I had to sign this document and vow that I would never do this again, repent, essentially. And they said I would get 50 lashes next time. And then they released us. My cousins came and picked us up. So the moral police did all that. So in 2013 alone, there were 3 million individuals stopped by the moral police in Iran. And for things like walking their poodle, having a beer and them smelling it on their breath, being out with a boyfriend they're not married to, wearing too much makeup or showing their hair. And
Wow.
yeah, and 90% of the people who are stopped are women, so it's very much targeted. So this app is very powerful in supporting women in, advocating for themselves and honoring people's freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and gender equality.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, and it really does show that story really does show your connection to why you would care about this app and why your leadership addresses things like, moral police and things like that. And so one of the things I want to just know in closing is, what is it that specifically that you're working for? Like, what is the value that's most important to you in the world?
You left the hardest question for last, didn't you? I think civil liberties. I know it sounds vague, but for each citizen, each human being having the right to live their lives if they're not harming others, speak their mind, express themselves, believe in whatever they want, self-determine, whatever that looks like, I think is critical. I think that's such a critical first step. And it breaks my heart that we have a country full of young Iranians who are techie, who are global, who are being ruled at best by 10% of the country, who are, old fanatics. So I just want them to be free, to be able to breathe.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm really struck by in your leadership is and the way that you live in the world is you're so courageous and willing to just get out there, and you're so vivacious. I'd love for you to speak a little bit about, what does freedom mean for you? What does it look like in your life? When you say the right to civil liberties and to be free, show me what a life of freedom
can look like.
Yeah.
And freedom can look so different for each person. It's very personal, right? So for me, freedom looks like being able to do the work I want to do in the world, and not going to prison for it. Freedom looks like my kid's off from school next week, and I've been really busy, so I'm actually going to take most of the week off and trying to figure out what to do. And I'm told my husband he can't go. I'm like, okay, the two of us are going, and that's fine. I don't need his permission to leave the country, which is with my kid, which is something in Iran you would. That's freedom. He wants to camp, and I want him to learn to swim. So we're going to Baja. It's one direct flight away, right? So we're going to Baja, we're going to camp on the beach. And so freedom is I can swim in the ocean and have my hair open and do what I want. And it's that simple. I can listen to music and have a beer on the beach. It doesn't have to be that crazy. It doesn't have to be this big things. It can be those big things too, right?
Yeah.
Like doing this work is big. But it can be those small things as well. I can sit next to a family that I just met, or, whoever's there without it being an issue. If I'm not married to a man that I have a conversation with on the beach, it's fine. I'm not going to get arrested for that.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, when you talk on that level, it's like I start to understand the issue so much more intimately. Like I start to
Right.
be like, whoa, coming from the perspective that I come from, it's very hard for me to imagine
Right.
like shifting my scarf and turning it around and having that be a problem for anybody.
And I want to kind of make sure the conversation is still subtle. You know, Iran's a very complicated country. It has very high literacy rate. People leave the country, come out, do tremendously well. You know, like Stanford Electrical Engineering Department takes 10 people from just one university in Iran every year. Like,
Wow.
it's really educated. There are more women graduating from college than men. So in some ways, it's a rich country, has a lot is going for it, right? And the individuals are incredible, the citizens. So I just want to hold all of that too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that is one of the important things about personal storytelling is that we can hold the complexities and nuances when we know somebody's whole self or more of them than they normally share. We don't see them as a victim or a perpetrator or whatever. We can see the nuances and the complications of their human story. And that comes across in the way that you lead and the way that you talk about United for Iran. So thank you so much
Thank you.
for being a part of this conversation. I've learned a lot from you, even though we've been in lots of conversations before. I've learned a lot in this conversation, and I hope that our viewers have too. And I'd love for you to just share with our viewers, how can they be a part of United for Iran? What is the call to action for them? Where can they find you online?
Sure. Our website is united4iran.org. So if you sign up, you can get all the information about the work we're doing. Specifically, our two latest projects that I would love you to know about. One is the Iran Prison Atlas, which tells the stories of all the individuals who are political prisoners, all the respective judges in all the prisons. You can also zoom out and see trends and patterns. And we're doing campaigns based on that. We're also launching Iran Incubator, which I just mentioned to you, and we're very excited. We love to get media, and we're looking for teams of folks that can join us specifically towards app development for apps like Gersha that I mentioned through Iran Incubator for use in Iran and beyond.
Thank you so much. And viewers, if you've been moved by this interview and you want to be a part of United for Iran, please contact Firuzeh and get involved, make your voice heard, tell your story, and we'll see you tomorrow.